This hand points the way to an experience human eyes have never before seen.
Earlier this evening, I saw what looked like a small meteor drop into the desert not far from here.
You mean it could have been a spaceship?
Robert Clarke is the scientist caught between vicious gangsters and the astounding she monster. Here is a power that frightens the deer in the forest, terrifies fearless dogs. A woman so intriguing that her face and figure fascinate every man. The woman whose warmth consumes. But the astounding she monster is no more to be feared than beasts of our own underworld.
In case you get any more cute ideas, that's a sample of what's going on.
If you're not too afraid, make a date with the woman you'll never forget.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're going to catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me.
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the American International Podcast. My name is Jeff Markin.
My name is Cheryl Lightfoot.
And today we are taking a look at The Astounding She Monster from 1957.
The Astounding She Monster was directed by Ronnie Ashcroft with a screenplay by Frank Hall. The story's by Frank Hall and Ronnie Ashcroft, and it was produced by Ronnie Ashcroft, but he did everything.
And The Astounding She Monster stars Robert Clarke as Dick Cutler, Kenne Duncan as Nat Burdell, Marilyn Harvey as Margaret Chaffee, Jeanne Tatum as Esther Malone, Shirley Kilpatrick as the She Monster, Ewing Brown as Brad Conley, and appearing uncredited are Al Avalon as the radio newscaster, Scott Douglas as the narrator, and Egan the Collie as himself.
Good boy. The Astounding She Monster starts in outer space as we zoom in on a galaxy. There's a very portentous narrator telling us that the ancient astronomers and philosophers believed that the future of the world was written in the stars, but they also believed that the past was printed in the black void of the night. And those ancient sages believed that in the beginning, when the universe was still in its infancy, there was a cataclysmic explosion that destroyed everything, throwing up huge molten bodies across infinite distances of space. Was it an explosion caused by a nuclear bomb? No, we call that the Big Bang Theory now. A civilization may have existed in the distant corners of time and was wiped out of existence because of the careless use of such tremendous power. Does it make no sense to calculate its enormity? Are we today on the verge of repeating this cosmic suicide? Some people are talking about it. Some people. Not only on Earth, but also on remote planets in the galaxy. There is one planet in particular where its people fear that if the Earth isn't destroyed first, it will destroy the universe. These people have already begun to act. And then we see one planet in particular. Watch Antares, a star of the fourth magnitude in the constellation of Scorpio. If you look closely, you'll notice a small, bright meteor has separated from the star and is flying through space at incredible speeds. What is its destination?
And leaving us to dwell on that question, we go into the opening credits, after which our dry narrative continues. The narrator describes the action as we see the character of Margaret Chaffee, described as young, beautiful, and very rich, and that this is the beginning of a normal, carefree day in the life of a socialite.
Or is it?
She gets into her car and starts driving, and we cut to 3 people in a car. The narrator tells us that for these 3 people, this day means the beginning of a job so carefully planned for so many weeks.
As Margaret's driving, another car pulls up and blocks her off. 2 thugs get out of that car and drag her out of hers and into theirs.
The narrator dryly describes this entire sequence as the 2 men take her into their car and drive away. Then a police car drives up with sirens blaring. They find her car, probably from no small help from the narrator.
He was also on the phone while he was talking to us. Then we cut to the San Gabriel Mountains, where a man who's walking his dog sees a bright light in the sky. It's a meteor of unusual color, apparently, but this is a black and white movie. We'll take his word for it. The meteor crash lands, and he and his dog go to investigate.
The narrator describes his character as the ever-so-innocent bystander and his canine friend. And then we cut to the narrator introducing the final character. Our visitor from beyond the imagination, evil unto evil.
It's a woman. She's wearing a shiny bodysuit. She's walking away from the wreckage with her shimmering persona, making the whole film kind of look swimmy.
It's as if she's fading in and out of our reality. The animals of the forest, foxes and deer, don't seem to like her and react negatively to her presence.
And the local fauna either flees or dies at her hand.
A rattlesnake is no threat. She picks it up, it immediately dies, and she just tosses it aside.
There's a coyote kind of scowls at her.
And a deer jumps up and runs away as she approaches. But a deer would do that for anyone.
Now we're in a car with 4/7 of the cast, and they're driving into the mountains. One of the kidnappers turns on plot point radio, which goes into great detail about the kidnapped victim, Margaret Chaffee, and her expensive car, along with their planned 6-month tour of Europe. There's a bottle blonde kidnapper who's downing a bottle of booze. She throws the empty out the window. When all of a sudden, the driver of the car sees a shimmering something outside the vehicle.
The driver is Brad, and he swerves, and the car crashes into the embankment. Nat, the other male kidnapper, and Brad get out to survey the damage. Nat asks what made him drive off the road, and Brad explains that he saw something in the road, and it looked like a naked dame. They realize they won't be able to fix the car. They get the girls from the back, untie Margaret, the kidnappee's hands, and remove her gag.
He pushes her to start walking, and unbeknownst to them, they're on their path to destiny. It's also known as a cabin in the woods.
Now that all the players have been introduced, according to the narration, the time has come to set the story in motion. The four of them walk along, and we intercut with a close-up of the mysterious invader. They continue walking.
Inside the man, who is a geologist.
Inside the man?
Inside the cabin. Inside the cabin, the man, who is a geologist, is talking to his dog. His dog is refusing to eat horse meat, and therefore must go hungry, at least for now. The geologist then performs an experiment under the collie's close supervision.
As he's doing this, he's musing about the meteor that he saw. He says there may not be much left of it, but he may be able to find some traces of the metal it was composed of. And boy, it sure was an odd color.
And now everyone's all together, well, almost everyone, as the kidnappers and their victim arrive at the cabin.
It's the Jeep outside that catches Brad's and Nat's eyes. Nat tells Brad to wait outside with the girls, and Nat checks out the Jeep, no keys. He goes to the cabin window, take a look inside, and he sees the geologist alone inside with his dog. The dog, who we've learned is named Egan, starts to growl at the presence outside the window. Dick asks if that old black bear is wandering around outside again, but tells his dog that he's safe inside with him.
Well, not quite. Nat, one of the kidnappers, enters the cabin, gun drawn. He threatens the geologist, whose name is Dick, who runs right up to him like he's not afraid of getting shot.
I think he's worried about Egan's safety and goes to stand between them.
Well, Nat, the kidnapper, says that he's fond of dogs, but he's willing to shoot this one if he has to. Dick grouses that this is his house, and Nat says that he'll ask for an invitation next time, but right now he just wants to borrow the Jeep.
Dick says he isn't in the habit of lending his Jeep to strangers, but given the circumstances and the gun, he's going to make an exception. He tells Nat that the keys are in his jacket pocket, and Nat goes to retrieve them, but he also finds Dick's gun. He pockets that, and Dick warns him that the road is dangerous and the lights are out in the Jeep, and that he'll never make it if he tries to leave before morning.
After hearing this, Nat calls out to his fellow kidnapper, Brad, to bring everyone in.
Nat explains that his partner, Brad, can fix the Jeep. He did his postgraduate work in San Quentin.
I didn't know they had an automotive program. So everyone enters the cabin. As Margaret enters, she goes straight to Dick, but before she can say anything, Nat pulls her back and tells her to shut up.
Esther, the woman accompanying them, asks if there's anything to drink in this dump, and Nat calls her a lousy drunk.
I prefer to be called an alcoholic, she monologues. It's part of her one-woman show, I'm sure.
Nat tells Brad to go out and start working on the Jeep, and to take the dog with him.
Brad needs some tools, and Dick provides some.
Dick is looking at Margaret, and Nat says, if you're wondering who she is, don't bother. And Dick comments that she does look a little out of place with this group.
I didn't get that vibe.
And Margaret finds a bottle and hands it to a grateful Esther.
So now it's a party. Esther invites Margaret to imbibe, but she declines. Nat, however, zeroes in on the booze, forbidding Esther to have it, but drinking a little bit himself.
He tells her that she needs to take it easy because he doesn't need her getting crocked. And then we get some conversation that tells of Esther's backstory. Esther was once a member of New York's upper crust.
But how Nat found her was stone dead drunk outside the Riviera Club. And then Nat calls the filthy rich a bunch of parasites, and in doing so is quite ahead of his time, I think.
Dick says that a lot of the modern American millionaires have earned their wealth, but Nat says they just happen to be at the right place at the right time, and it's all coincidence.
Yet Dick is just adorable in this, isn't he?
Then Nat tells a parable about a guy who goes to the racetrack, picks the winner, and wins a bundle. Did he earn it? Nah. If there hadn't been 1,000 others making bad bets on the same race, he wouldn't have won a thing. And a millionaire wouldn't have gotten rich without a million little guys working their tails off for him.
So Dick asks Nat if he plans on redistributing the wealth that he gains among the poor, and Nat says exactly.
And since our society isn't going to cooperate, this little guy is going to move in and take what he can get.
Nat says exactly. You're only a crook if you're in the minority. And then he conjures up a Hitler reference.
Take a crook like Hitler. You're only a crook if you're in the minority, but surround him with a million other crooks, and now you've got the leader of a country, and no one thinks you're a crook anymore. As he's talking, Esther gets the bottle away from Nat, and she gets in a few swigs.
Dick asks Nat if he's going to move in and take what he can, and Nat says yes with my moxie. And Esther says, you're pointing at the hole in your head.
Then Nat tells her to shut up, you crummy lush. Then Brad comes in and says it's no use, he can't fix the Jeep, the headlights are out.
Nat says that they can hang out there till the morning, but Brad's concerned that the police will be on their trail. And Dick says, oh, so the police are after you.
Brad immediately apologizes for his slip, and Nat tells him that the way he keeps putting his foot in his kisser, it's a wonder he doesn't get athlete's mouth.
So Dick once again wants to know about the police being after them. Margaret interjects, they kidnapped me, and then Nat socks her in the mouth.
Dick tells Nat not to manhandle the girl, but Nat pushes him down, saying, stay out of this or you'll get slugged too. Brad sits down and starts to carve his initials into Dick's coffee table. Dick protests, but Nat explains that Brad carves his initials wherever he goes, which is probably a bad habit, especially for a criminal. But then Brad offers to carve his initials into Dick's face instead, and Nat tells him to sit down.
And Esther asks if anyone objects to her drinking, and Nat says that she can get fried for all he cares. And she says, pan-fried or French fried? And Nat tells Esther the lush, I don't care, either way, you come out a mess. So she takes the bottle and goes off.
Then Nat wanders over to Dick's quote-unquote laboratory. It's a table, there's some test tubes, a couple of flasks, and a rock.
One rock.
One rock. Nat picks up the rock and says, you some kind of rock hound?
Dick says no, he's a geologist, and Nat's like, same difference. And then the phone rings.
Dick says he better answer it or the caller might get suspicious.
Nat agrees, but cautions him in giving away too much.
So Dick answers the phone, and it's Harry, the fire marshal. Harry appears to be just standing off screen and not mic'd.
And that his proximity means that he saw a small white fire near Dick's place, and he wants to know what Dick thinks about it. But we'll never find out because Margaret runs to the phone at this point, screaming, help, help. Brad and Nat pull her back, and Dick explains to Harry that he's got some friends over, and they've had a few too many.
Esther helpfully pops up and said, that'd be me.
She's a funny drunk.
But Harry buys this story and asks Dick to look around for any signs of the fire. Dick says he will, and he'll report right back.
Nat's not very happy that Dick said he'd call back, but Dick said he had to do so or else Harry would come down to check on it himself. Brad hears manhandling Margaret, forcibly covering her mouth with his hand until she bites him. Nat says she should not have done that, but Margaret doesn't care. She's just had it with being kidnapped by this point.
Nat strikes her, and Dick comes to her rescue and punches Nat. Brad holds Dick, and Esther tells Nat to beat his pretty face in as Dick takes a punch to the gut and the face.
It's quite the scrum.
Dick is down, and Brad goes for his gun. Nat tells him to hold it, and Brad looks up to see...
an alien! The she monster is standing in front of the picture window, but when she sees that she's been spotted, she jumps out of frame, literally.
Nat asks what's the matter. Brad looks like he's seen a ghost, and Brad says it's that lit up thing out there again.
Nat is skeptical and sends Brad out to check on it. Brad wants to know what he's supposed to do if it attacks him, and he tells Brad to spit in its eye.
So Brad goes out and starts wandering around. He walks a lot.
The music picks up as he takes a hike away from the cabin, down a hill, down the ravine. There's a coyote baying at the moon. More walking.
We follow his every step.
Somewhere he loses his hat. The coyote howls again. Now he's down on a shadowy path between some pine trees. And then he stumbles.
As he's going around a bush, we find the she monster coming around from the other side. He shoots 4 times and stumbles backwards. We go back inside the cabin, and 2 more shots can be heard. And Nat says, that dimwit, I told him not to shoot his gun. Then back to Brad. He shoots 2 more shots out of his now supposed to be empty gun. I'm counting the bullets, so he's shot 8 times.
Brad falls to the ground. The she-monster reaches down to him and sort of zaps him. We hear what sounds like a joy buzzer going off, and he's dead.
Well, first he screams, obviously overdubbed scream, and
very manly scream.
Not the most masculine scream you'll have ever heard. And then the she-monster backs away.
Well, she can't front away, that's for sure.
Now back inside the cabin, everyone hears Egan barking. Esther is telling Nat to calm down and that Brad probably shot the old witch and is coming back. And the dog continues to bark.
So now Nat needs to go check on Brad. He's going to leave Esther, the lush, in charge of the hostages, and he gives her a gun saying, shoot him if they get out of line. And now we get to follow Nat as he takes the same path that Brad did, down the ravine, through the path, coyotes howling.
And Egan continues to bark. We follow Nat every step as he traces Brad's steps. He finds where Brad lost his hat and he picks that up. Then he starts yelling for Brad.
He's headed towards where Brad's body is, and then he sees her, the she-monster. But Egan is there first. He approaches the she-monster and gets the same joy buzzer treatment.
He barks at her, tail wagging madly.
And he makes a noise reminiscent of Curly from the Three Stooges as he expires.
Nat sees her and shoots at her 11 times.
These are some miracle guns.
She backs away. Then Nat heads back for the cabin, dragging Brad's body.
All the way up the ravine. That is a very strong man. In the cabin, the booze games have begun. Like a classic riddle, the puzzle is this. In Dick's room, there's a bottle of booze, which Esther really wants. But if she sends Dick in there to get it, he might pull something. And then she'd look like a moron. But if she sends Margaret in there to get it, Margaret might escape out the bedroom window. If Esther goes in to get it, then Dick and Margaret might use the phone and call for help. So how does Esther get the booze? And then the phone rings. Esther is paralyzed. What to do?
Dick says that he'd better answer it. Esther tells him to stay where he is. And Margaret says that if Nat were here, that he'd want Dick to answer it. And Dick agrees. Of course he would, because Esther wouldn't want the fire warden down here, would she? And Esther says that if she had a drink, she could think better.
Kudos to Margaret and Dick here for really amping up the tension.
So Dick says that he'll go get that bottle for her. Esther tells him no. And Margaret says, you'd better let him answer the phone. And Dick says, make up your mind, because as soon as it stops ringing, they're going to suspect something is wrong. Then Margaret suggests maybe a nice tall drink would go really well with her situation right now.
I love the psychological games they're playing.
And Dick offers again to get the bottle for her. And then the phone stops ringing. Esther says it was probably a wrong number anyway. Dick says, couldn't be. Up here, the calls are placed through the operator. They don't get wrong numbers. They continue taunting her, asking what Nat is going to do when he finds out that they didn't answer the phone. And how about that drink?
Esther relents. She lets Dick go into his bedroom to get the bottle. When he comes out, the way he acts, placing the bottle on the table, makes Esther suspicious. Then suddenly a shot rings out, shattering the bottle and all the dramatic tension.
It's Nat shooting his 12th bullet from that gun.
He could have reloaded on the way up. You said so. Nat is back with Brad's body, and he's angry. He's just seen a monster.
And he says that Nat wasn't kidding about that monster. And he says he must have taken 4 or 5 shots at her, but we know better. He also says that she just touched the dog and he dropped dead.
Oh, Dick is very sad that Egon is dead, but he examines Brad's body. After a few seconds, he declares that he's seen signs of radium poisoning. Esther wants them to get Brad's body out of there. So Nat puts him in the bedroom. Poor Dick.
As this is going on, Dick tells Esther and Margaret about the meteor that he saw earlier that evening. And Margaret asks if it could have been a spaceship, because that's the logical conclusion to...
Something in the sky?
To make sense of everything that's been going on.
Well, it kind of is.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that sarcastically. There's only so many things that make sense, and unfortunately, this is one of them.
It walks like a duck.
Rick says maybe, but that nothing should have been able to survive the crash and disintegration that must have followed.
Nat wants to leg it. Here they're sitting ducks, but Esther wants to stay inside, thinking it's more safe there. Who will win? Dick tells Nat that it may already be too late for him. By carrying Brad's body back, he may have contracted secondhand radium poisoning. Nat wants to know why he didn't drop dead like Brad did, but Dick says he didn't get a direct contact like Brad did. Nat wants to know if there's a cure, and Dick says, yeah, but he has to get to a doctor now. Dick says that Nat will know he's sick when his face and hands start to change color. Nat goes over to Esther to see if she thinks his face changed color. Esther says no, and that Dick and Margaret are playing him for a sucker. Margaret asks Nat if he wants to gamble with his life like that.
Just then the phone rings again. Margaret pipes up saying that it rang earlier, but they didn't answer it. Esther says it's because she didn't know what to say, and Nat is certain that it's that fire marshal again. He probably heard the shots and wants to know what's going on. So Nat tells Dick to answer it, and to just say that they were shooting ducks or something. Dick asks if perhaps they should tell him about the thing outside, and that he could get help, but Nat says nah, because he doesn't want to do anything to risk losing his investment, meaning his kidnap victim.
Dick answers the phone, and it's Harry again. He says he heard shots. Dick lies and says that they were shooting at a bear, that old black bear that's been wandering around. And then he says, oh, there's no fire. They just had their flashlights on when they were out looking around. Harry says that there's something going on, and they need to turn the radio on right now for an important news bulletin about that kidnapping that everyone's talking about.
Esther turns on the radio.
It's Plot Point Radio again.
The announcer is announcing that Margaret's parents have decided not to pay the ransom, and that police are convinced that the kidnappers are headed for the San Gabriel Mountain and are closing in.
As you can expect, this news is pretty distressing for Margaret and pretty angrifying for Nat. He says that her parents had better pay if they know it's good for them.
Nat asks, what are we going to do? And Dick goes to him and tells him, you mean, what are you going to do? And Nat does have a plan. He says lights or no lights, he's going to get in the Jeep and he's getting out of there.
So everyone leaves the cabin, piles into the Jeep, and then suddenly she appears. The she-monster appears on the driver's side of the Jeep. The women scream and everyone scrambles back inside.
Before running inside, Nat takes 2 shots, that's 13 and 14, and he joins the others inside. Safe inside, they all start discussing what they've seen. What a disgusting creature. She's obviously protected by some sort of thin protective metal of some kind.
Obviously. Now it's time to formulate a plan. At this point, Nat just wants to get to the doctor. Dick thinks that he can make a torch to burn her, so he gets some gasoline from his bedroom, and they're rigging up a torch. Dick makes Nat promise to let Margaret go once they escape, and Nat agrees. But oops, it's too late.
As they're bustling around, Margaret shouts out, there she is, and the she-monster crashes through the window, and Esther and Margaret run outside screaming.
It's so funny watching this. Dick lights Nat's torch and exits, leaving the torch with Nat, who waves the torch at the she-monster before joining the others outside.
The 4 of them are gathering outside as the she-monster approaches from the cabin, and even though they had this plan, they decide not to use it. Nat has his torch and is waving it towards her, and Dick is there holding the bucket, but the invader walks past Nat and toward the others. Dick and Margaret scatter, and the she-monster gets a hold of Esther, and Esther screams, not unlike the way Brad did.
Or Egan. Then she advances on Nat. He drops the torch and backs up to the edge of the ravine. He waits for her to rush at him, and then ducks to the side, and she goes over, cartwheeling all the way down. She looks like she may be dead lying on the ground there.
On the way down, she also screamed, much like Brad.
This movie really kills it with the screams.
Nat looks down at her still body, and he's satisfied, so he's heading back to the cabin, but then the she-monster stirs.
In the cabin, Dick and Margaret are starting to feel safe, because now they're alone. Margaret wants to drive off, but Dick said that would be a suicide mission with the lights being out. He takes the phone. He's going to call Highway Patrol.
Just then, Nat returns to the cabin, and he's not happy to see Dick on the phone.
Dick has had a lot of time to make this phone call, but apparently he still hasn't made it. And he never will, because Nat tears the phone out of the wall.
Dick explains that he was calling for help, and Nat says that they don't need any, and that this thing won't be coming after them anymore, because he left her at the bottom of the ravine.
Dick reminds Nat that he promised to let Margaret go.
But Nat didn't think Dick was much help, so that's not going to happen now. Then Dick reminds him of the radiation poisoning and that the police are about to converge on the area, and that Nat should probably get to a doctor.
So Nat says we're all getting in the Jeep and going. Dick wants Nat to go on his own and leave him and Margaret there, and Margaret says since her dad's not going to pay, he might as well not bother taking her. But Nat thinks he has a way of making her dad pay by sending him bits and pieces of her clump of hair, a chunk of her fingers, so they all go.
They get in the Jeep, Dick is driving, and they reach the point where Brad was killed, and there, hanging out as she does, is the she-monster. The Jeep stops. Dick is trying to start it as Nat starts shooting at her from the back seat 6 times.
Dick and Margaret take this opportunity to scamper away. Nat tries to restart the Jeep, but the she-monster zaps him.
He screams, but it's a much more manly scream than Brad's was. Not that it matters, because he's just as dead as Brad is now.
Dick and Margaret have run back to the cabin, and then the she-monster lazily glides back up that way.
Dick tells Margaret to keep an eye through the window while he tries to fix the phone. Dick suspects that she's protected by a thin film of metal unknown to them. But if they can penetrate it, expose her to the Earth's atmosphere, that's as far as he can get, because he turns, and Margaret, who is paying attention to him and not looking out the window, fails to see that the she-monster is now standing right behind her.
A startled Margaret runs and Dick follows.
She runs outside, screaming again.
A slow-motion chase ensues. A black bear toddles toward the she-monster, and Dick and Margaret are hiding nearby. Then the she-monster boxes the bear's ears, killing it. And it says wow a lot as it dies, like wow, 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 wow.
So Dick and Margaret run back to the cabin, and Dick has a plan.
Since the she-monster has radium in her construction, she must also have platinum or something. I don't know, it's science. He believes that he makes something called aqua regia. It will dissolve the platinum in her or whatever.
And since he has a bunch of different acids in his chemistry set that he uses to test rock specimens and do science, he mixes up 1/3 nitric acid and 2/3 hydrochloric acid, and with that, he makes an acid bomb.
It's just stuff you have lying around the house. Dick then goes outside to wait for her, but the she-monster came in through the bedroom window this time. Outside, Dick hears Margaret scream.
He runs back inside, where Margaret is cornered by the she-monster, and Margaret tells him to throw the acid, and he says that he will as soon as he can get her away from Margaret. He throws something to get the creature's attention. It works. She turns on a dime towards Dick.
He throws the flask of fluid at her. It breaks, and she screams in agony and falls down. She starts to phase out or disintegrate out of the picture.
Margaret asks if she's dead, and Dick says that not only dead, but it won't be long before there's no trace of her. Then Margaret realizes that the Earth's atmosphere did destroy her, and Dick agrees, saying that she is completely disintegrating, and to look, and as they do so, the she-monster fades away.
Margaret wishes that she could let her uncaring parents know that she's all right. Then she notices that the she-monster left behind a medallion. Dick wonders if she's not trying to get the last laugh, as it would kill them to touch it. Margaret notices the pendant has hinges, and since Dick knows that her feminine curiosity must be satisfied, he dons some gloves and cracks it open.
Inside, they find a note written in English signed by the master of the Council of Planets, Tellus Galaxy.
And Margaret wonders where the Tellus Galaxy is, and Dick says, well, it's where the Earth is located. And I wonder who came up with that one. Not what I was taught. Margaret figures that she was an emissary.
And Dick reads the note aloud. To the people of Earth.
English speakers only.
You have been under our close surveillance for a number of decades. We now feel your civilization has progressed far enough to make you eligible for membership in the Council of Planets.
English speakers only.
This council, for your information, is a universal governing body dedicated to the advancement of planetary progress. It's an agency which Earth seriously needs in this period of crisis and chaos in which it now finds itself. Many of our member planets have experienced the same disturbing problems which confront Earth today. We feel that a meeting with the heads of these planets would definitely benefit Earth in the solution of its own global difficulties.
As long as it's the English speakers only.
If you would like a meeting so arranged, relay your wishes to the bearer of this message, and she will return to us with word of your decision. Oops.
Oops. This puzzles Dick and Margaret, because as an emissary of peace, she had a kill first, offer peace later policy.
Margaret says that she was such a menace. Why did she try to kill us all?
Dick thinks that maybe she did that because she felt attacked, and Margaret says that they should have sent a warning that they were sending an emissary. Dick wonders how they'll react when the she-monster doesn't return. Marilyn says that if they know humans, English-speaking people, like they say they do, they should know that we're basically dumb brutes who lash out whenever we feel threatened.
And she suggests that maybe they'll send another emissary. And Dick wonders if that's the case, if the second emissary would be there to extend an offer of peace or to avenge her death.
And then we pan to the window, pause, and the words "the end" come up. And that's the end.
Gives you something to think about.
You learn too late that man was a feeling creature.
Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we are talking about The Astounding She Monster from 1957.
The Astounding She Monster was picked up for distribution by American International Pictures to be released as the bottom half of one of its double features. Edward D. Wood Jr., the famously bad movie director, was an unofficial consultant on the film. Ashcroft, the director, and Wood knew each other, as Ashcroft served as assistant director on Wood's Night of the Ghouls. Now, as this is screenwriter Frank Call's only film credit, it has been speculated, in a book that I read, that the script may have actually been penned by Wood, but we don't know.
The film was almost called The Naked Invader, but that title was dropped to please the censor, and the film became The Astounding She Monster.
Now, this is an astounding short movie, so few locations were used for the film. The interior shots were done in an austere mountain cabin set, and exterior shots took place in the nearby woods. Locations include Fraser National Park outside Los Angeles, Griffith Park in Los Angeles, and Larchmont Studios in Hollywood. And there was shooting done in Brentwood, which probably stood in for Margaret Chaffee's neighborhood.
According to the American Film Institute entry on the movie, The Astounding She Monster was originally planned as a $50,000 production with a 7-day shooting schedule, but was made even less expensively. The entire production cost a mere $18,000 and was sold to AIP for $60,000. This makes The Astounding She Monster quite possibly one of the cheapest films AIP ever released.
The film was completed in just 4 days, and the costs were minimized by such things as having an uncredited film editor work in Ashcroft's living room. An IMDb entry identifies Ashcroft as the editor, and other sources we have say that Ashcroft was the owner of a film editing service, so that tracks.
Exterior scenes were shot in pantomime, so Ashcroft wouldn't have to worry about the sound syncing up, and the narration served to explain any scenes that weren't self-evident.
On the first day of filming, the back of Kilpatrick's costume split open when she bent over. The rapid shooting schedule meant that there was no time to sew another costume, only to pin together the one they had. Kilpatrick said that she was directed for the rest of the film to walk backwards out of all the scenes that she had walked into frontwards, though it looks like some of the shots were reversed, and I could tell that some of them were used multiple times. And we do see the backside of the she-monster in one scene that may have been shot before the wardrobe malfunction.
Kilpatrick was a pin-up model, popular in men's magazines at the time she was cast in the film, and a lot of reference material about the movie mentions her physical endowments. Ashcroft is said to have drafted his wife Lorraine to serve as Kilpatrick's stunt double.
Robert Clarke, who played Dick, said that the cabin was supposed to have a window pane for the she-monster to crash through, but when the crew dropped their one fake pane, made out of sugar and water, breaking it, Ashcroft decided to salvage what he had left of it and let the magic of editing save the scene.
Salaries for the actors were reasonable, according to Clarke, who said Ashcroft paid me $500 a week, which I thought was a good salary for this type of picture, and he promised me 4% of his producer's share. Thanks to his honesty and integrity, over the period of the next 18 months or so, I made a couple $1,000. Clarke also said that a very minimal crew, one gaffer, a helper for him, one cameraman, and one soundman, was used on the film. But Clarke remembers the film as kind of a piece of junk. Certainly I wouldn't be very proud of having been in it.
Astoundingly, for a film this cheap, the film's score by Gunther Kauer featured a 45-piece orchestra and was recorded in Germany. Now, most prints of this film bear a 1957 copyright. However, the film was not formally copyrighted until January 7th, 1985, when it was registered as copyrighted by Ashcroft Productions.
The Astounding She Monster was released in American theaters on April 10, 1958 by American International Pictures on a double bill with Roger Corman's The Saga of the Viking Women and Their Voyage to the Waters of the Great Sea Serpent.
In AIP's press book sent to theaters to promote both movies, theater owners are promised that the climax of this movie will keep both young and old on the edge of their seats. And that was referring to The Astounding She Monster, believe it or not.
Box Office Magazine recommended theater owners set up a Saturday afternoon masquerade matinee and have each child dress up in an outfit that pertains to this combination, perhaps meaning the Viking Women and She Monster double feature, or perhaps they meant for the kids to dress up like naked invaders, lonely geologists, aging lushes, kidnappers, and socialites.
That would be a fun little kid party, I think. Now, taglines for this movie include, "A creature from beyond the stars, evil, beautiful, deadly."
What happens when a beautiful she-monster from another world tangles with a bunch of ruthless gangsters? Can their bullets kill this terrifying and inhuman beauty?
Nope. When the movie was released in the United Kingdom under the title The Mysterious Invader, it was distributed by Anglo Amalgamated. The British Board of Film Censors granted it an A certificate, meaning it was more suitable for adults than for children. But unlike many American films that were shown in Great Britain at the time, nothing was cut from it. It was also released in Italy as Lei il Monstro and Mexico as Invasora de Jupiter.
The Astounding She Monster stayed in domestic theatrical circulation well beyond its initial release. A 1962 newspaper advertisement from Maryland shows that The Astounding She Monster was the last film in a 4-feature giant horror show at the New Albert Theater in Baltimore. The first 3 movies were A Bucket of Blood, Attack of the Giant Leeches, and Attack of the Puppet People.
Bob Clarke, who played Dick, was inspired by Ashcroft and figured if Ronnie could make a movie, given all his limitations, then so could he. He made The Hideous Sun Demon in 6 weekends, but that film wasn't for AIP.
Box Office Magazine called The Astounding She Monster a worthy companion to Viking Women and the Sea Serpent, saying it was put together with imagination and a larger share of human interest elements than is usual in offerings of its type. The plot developments, while appropriately spine-tingling, should not prove too great a strain on the popcorn and bubblegum set, while also noting that Shirley Kilpatrick makes an unusually eye-filling monster.
Those endowments again. The monthly film bulletin said the feminine monster shimmers and wobbles and oscillates on each of her many sinister appearances, but unfortunately, the rest of the picture behaves accordingly, and it is only the absence of the monster that allows the film to remain static.
The Motion Picture Herald said the movie should be welcomed by those patrons who dote on the far from conventional behavior of mere earthlings when confronted by visitors from outer space.
Despite the lackluster quality of the film, Astounding She Monster and Viking Women vs. the Sea Monster did quite well at theaters, and that allowed Ashcroft and Clarke to rack up substantial royalties.
Despite the film's reputation, the 1957 theatrical release poster for The Astounding She Monster was selected for an exhibition of 35 visually arresting posters for B-movies at Binghamton University that ran in May and June of 2016.
On television, clips from the film are used in the made-for-television, quote, documentary, Bride of Monster Mania, which was hosted by Elvira and shown shortly before Halloween 2000 on the AMC network. The entire film was shown as an episode of the TV series Pale Moonlight Theater on January 19, 2015.
The film is listed among the 100 most amusingly bad movies ever made in Golden Raspberry Award founder John Wilson's book, The Official Razzie Movie Guide.
There's only a few cast members in this movie, and only a few of them went on to do anything else. Robert Clarke, who played Dick Cutler, appeared in Beyond the Time Barrier in 1960.
Kenne Duncan, who played Nat Burdell, had previously appeared in Flesh and the Spur in 1956.
And Jeanne Tatum, who was Esther the Lush, also known as Esther Malone, would go on to appear in The Ghost of Dragstrip Hollow in 1959.
So Cheryl, it's time for us to give our thoughts on The Astounding She Monster. Tell us how you rate this film using our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic.
I selected this movie for the podcast. Wasn't randomly chosen. I chose it based on the title and, of course, the poster, but without knowing much more about it. After watching it a couple of times, I see that both of those marketing lures overpromised and underdelivered. The movie is very short, and that's not a complaint because I love short movies. But within the brief 62-minute runtime, there are a lot of repetitive scenes of characters walking through the woods, running in and out of the cabin, like a lot. The film also underdelivers on the title character. She's hardly astounding. She barely does anything other than sashay through the woods, zapping various humans and animals to death. She can't even turn around. I know the script wants us to think that she's using radium to poison her victims, but as we mentioned in the synopsis of the movie, the effect sounds exactly like a joy buzzer being deployed. She never speaks, and she's easily killed by a few chemicals that Dick the geologist has lying around the house. She might as well be a pesky insect taken out with a can of Raid. And the movie can't seem to decide if she comes in peace or if she's the vanguard of an unfriendly alien invasion. Certainly her behavior is nothing but hostile, and the opening narration speaks of a plan to neutralize Earth before they become a problem for the rest of the galaxy. Yet she carries around an offer, written in English, for Earth to join the Council of Planets and benefit from the combined wisdom of its members, if you can call it wisdom, because this was a really poorly planned offer of help. If I came to your house, killed your cat, your dog, and your husband, and then handed you a coupon for a free lawn service for a year, you'd hardly think that was a great deal. So yeah, the movie has flaws. It's cheap, the premise is unclear, and it's pretty silly. But sometimes you want silly, so that actually works in its favor. Whoever did the sound effects for the film is the real MVP here. Every time an animal or person is killed, the SFX artist edited in a ridiculous sound that had me laughing. And I also really want to give it up for Marilyn Harvey. She's so funny in this. Every time the she-monster appears, she makes this hilarious face as she skedaddles out of the room. It's comedy gold. And there's a bit of cleverness to the script. I don't know if Ed Wood wrote it or not, but I think whoever did write it had something going there. Again, it's down to Marilyn Harvey as she tries to psych out her kidnappers. She does her best to undermine their confidence and their level of control of the situation. And then Robert Clarke joins in on this, as in the scene where Esther the Lush is trying to figure out how to get a bottle of liquor from the other room without leaving the two of them unguarded. It's so fun to watch. But despite all that, I'd really be hard-pressed to call this a good movie, but it's also not a bad movie. For me, it's a solid I. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I have to say that The Astounding She Monster is a pretty silly little film. It feels a little amateurish, and it is. But despite that, I think it does a decent job of working to the best of its ability within the confines of its budget. At times, it's like watching a stage play with all 5 main characters, besides the title character, sitting around the cabin, and all within frame at the same time. The film consists mostly of wide shots. There's a medium shot where Brad sees the invader at the window, as well as the sequence where Margaret and Dick are trying to get under Esther's skin, tempting her with drinks. And Nat gets a couple of close-ups when he's out searching for Brad, and again when he sends the invader down the ravine. And the she-monster gets a close-up, and that's just cut among the shots of the group walking to the cabin the first time. But except for these instances, the whole thing is shot wide. So with such a small cast, there are 6 main characters and a few off-screen voices, and a minimal use of locations, all the elements are present for a low-budget film. So this film had better deliver. But does it? It has a runtime of 62 minutes, but it's not a brisk 62 minutes. A lot of the time is filled with people walking. The she-monster walks a lot. She keeps traversing the same road, and not very gracefully. I think her walk is supposed to look otherworldly, and the Vaseline on the camera lens supports that, but it just looks kind of awkward, where every once in a while she turns and sidesteps. And then when Brad goes out looking for the lit-up thing that he saw, we get to watch him as he walks down the hillside, every step. And then we get to see Nat look for him and trace his every step. You know, the things that a film has to do to make sure it runs over 60 minutes. And when I heard that Edward D. Wood Jr. may have been the uncredited screenwriter, I could certainly see that. The narration definitely felt like something he would have come up with. The film opens with a description of this other planet and its rationalization that Earth must be destroyed, and then continues with a dry description of Margaret's kidnapping. And all of this would feel right at home in an Ed Wood movie. And the character of Esther kind of stands out like that as well, with her "that'd be me" line reflecting this.
I prefer to be called an alcoholic.
And the twist ending that tries to get deep and tell a message, but really makes no sense within the context of the story, where the beginning declared that Earth must be destroyed, and now they allegedly come in a mission of peace. This all has the mark of Ed Wood all over it. And about the ending, if despite everything we had just seen, the she-monster did come in peace to deliver a message, and Dick did point out that she only killed when she was under attack, which was all the time. Whenever anyone crossed her path, they'd start shooting at her. She might have done better to try to communicate with them, but she couldn't even muster a "take me to your leader." What was Dick supposed to do if he had received the invitation? "Gee, I'm flattered, but I'm just a lowly geologist, and I'm not really authorized to make decisions on behalf of the entire human race." And would she really have no idea that crashing through the window might be taken as an act of aggression? So in grading The Astounding She Monster, what it comes down to is, does this movie fall into the category of so bad it's good? And I don't think there's a clear answer to that question. The movie is certainly amusing in its monotony. The she-monster walks down the same stretch of road over and over and over again. Several times she comes in through the window, and Margaret and Esther scream and immediately bolt out the door. And it happens often enough that it's funny. The scene that stands out is when Margaret and Dick are being watched by Esther, and they use their knowledge of her weakness, her alcoholism, to try and wear her down. And that scene doesn't stand out because it's particularly good. It's not bad. It's just different from the rest of the film. And as I mentioned, the scene is shot differently with medium shots, so it feels a little more intimate than the rest of the film. But the tone itself is also different in that scene. So even though I was amused with The Astounding She Monster, I'm going to have to give this not so astounding she monster an I.
Once again, we agree.
And that's going to wrap up our episode on The Astounding She Monster.
An astoundingly short episode.
Until next time, I'm Jeff Markin.
I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.